Alright guys, so I got some pretty major breaking news here because the rotten and corrupted to her core senator from Arizona, Kyrsten Sinema, has officially announced that she is not going to be running for re-election and is basically going to be done at the end of this current term that she's in. So before we get into some of the recent history of what exactly she has done to this country in the last couple of years, let's go ahead and subject ourselves to a little bit of torture and listen to about the first minute or so of this statement that she just put out on Twitter.
In 2017, I warned we were approaching a crossroads. Our democracy was weakened by government dysfunction and the constant pull to the extremes by both political parties. I promised I would do my best to fix it, to protect and defend our Constitution, to listen to others without judging, to focus on what unites us, and to make Americans' lives better. Through listening, understanding, and compromise, we delivered tangible results that make America safer, stronger, and more prosperous. Yet, despite modernizing our infrastructure, ensuring clean water, delivering good jobs and safer communities, Americans still choose to retreat farther to their partisan corners. These solutions are considered failures, either because they're too much or not nearly enough. It's all or nothing. The outcome, less important than beating the other guy. The only political victories that matter these days are symbolic. Attacking your opponents on cable news or social media. Compromise is a dirty word. We've arrived at that crossroad, and we chose anger and division. I believe in my approach, but it's not what America wants right now. I love Arizona, and I am so proud of what we've delivered. Because I choose civility, understanding, listening, working together to get stuff done, I will lead the Senate at the end of this year.
Okay, that's about enough of that. So, a couple of different things here that stand out to me. Some words or phrases from her initial statement there. Number one, what she says at the beginning about how the issue with the dysfunction in Congress in the United States government is that we have just too many extremists on both sides of the aisle. I mean, what are we talking about here? On the one hand, on the very far right of the Republican Party, or really you could argue a huge bulk of the Republican Party as a whole, including Donald Trump, the current leader of that party, right? You have people who are essentially outright authoritarians at this point. You have people who couldn't give less of a shit about even pretending to have any semblance of democracy. You have people who are incredibly draconian when it comes to immigration, when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to domestic social programs as well, wanting to slash every social program they can get their hands on and destroy the administrative state. So many different things that we could talk about with the extremes of the Republican Party. And then on the other hand, you have radical extremists like Bernie Sanders and AOC, who want to give people health care and who want to address climate change, right, and lower prescription drug costs. So, I mean, this narrative, which she's not the only one who talks about this, but this idea that the issue in American politics is two radical extremes on both sides and we all need to meet in the middle, no, that's not the issue with American politics. The issue with our political system is that we have motherfuckers like you and many others in the Senate and in the House who are completely bought and controlled and in the pocket and doing the bidding of corporate America in the billionaire class. That is the issue with American politics, okay? It's not that people aren't willing to compromise, because that's not the kind of compromise she's talking about. She's not talking about people who have good faith disagreements on either side of the political spectrum and they're coming together and passing a big, bold agenda that's good for average working class Americans. That's not the compromise she's talking about, okay? She's talking about compromise between the most corrupt sellouts in our government who are both on opposite sides of serving the interests of corporate America, and they're going to come together to fuck average working class Americans. That's the kind of compromise that she's talking about, right? Notice how the compromise only happens in one direction. It only happens in the right-wing direction. Never compromise with the lefties, because the lefties are all radical, crazy extremists, right? And so the issue, again, is just pure corruption in our political system. It's not extremism on both sides. Wanting to give people universal health care and address climate change, that's not radical, okay? That is like baseline, providing basic necessities for people, okay? In the wealthiest country that has ever existed on the face of the planet. So that's number one. Number two, again, when she talks about unity, again, what does she mean? She means unity amongst the corrupt DC swamp creatures. That's what she's talking about. She's not talking about unity in terms of what the overwhelming majority of the American people support, because if that's what she was talking about in terms of forming unity, then she would have been in favor of a lot of the policies who she personally helped to destroy, to eviscerate, to tear into a million pieces, that were part of even what was Joe Biden, who already is supposedly this centrist candidate, right? The alternative to the radical Bernie Sanders. She torched a lot of his agenda, and I'm going to show you a graphic on that here in a second. So, I mean, everything in this statement, I didn't even watch the second half because I don't think that you need to, but everything she said in this initial statement, completely warped, completely dishonest, and, kind of skips over some important things that maybe people should know about Kyrsten Sinema and her Senate career here. So keep in mind, this is somebody who used to be a Green Party advocate, right? When she was in the earlier stages of her political career. She climbs the ladders, she gets a bunch of money from corporate America, and basically completely changes who she is, what she believes in, what she's fighting for. This was just one example. Sinema rakes in pharma and finance cash amid reconciliation negotiations. Remember this, Sinema has emerged as a key player in these negotiations surrounding this massive bill that Biden was trying to pass at the time, with the reconciliation bill needing the support of all 50 Democratic senators, with Kamala Harris then being the tie-breaking vote on that. But Sinema and her partner in crime here, Joe Manchin, have made it clear that they will not support the original $3.5 trillion Build Back Better price tag for the bill, and Sinema has also objected to including far-reaching prescription drug pricing proposals, certain proposed tax increases, and other party priorities. So, I mean, guys, the corruption in the U.S. political system is not complex. It's very straightforward. They get campaign contributions. They get promises of jobs, right, in this rotating, door of D.C. politics, this revolving door of D.C. politics. They get, lavished with hundreds of thousands of dollars from corporate America and the billionaire class. And then they turn around and they do their bidding. It's a one-to-one correlation. It's not difficult to figure out. Again, rakes in pharma and finance cash. And then what do you know? She turns around and, suddenly she has some concerns about regulating prescription drug prices, right? And taxing the wealthy. I wonder if there's a connection there. I mean, are we really this stupid? This is the same Kyrsten Sinema, by the way, who famously, as there was an amendment that was being proposed by Bernie Sanders back a couple of years ago in 2021 to adopt the $15 minimum wage as a part of this $1.9 trillion COVID relief plan. She famously went up and did this cutesy little thumbs down, right? In one of her outfits there. Thumbs down, bending, I don't want the American people to have anything remotely resembling a living wage. Ooh, look at me, I'm so cute. I mean, this is who Kyrsten Sinema is, right? And don't get me wrong, it's not just Kyrsten Sinema. She is an emblem of the broader structural problem here, right? Now, you also have this idea of rotating villains, and I'm sure that if it wasn't Kyrsten Sinema, if it wasn't Joe Manchin, it could have been any number of other Democrats that could have stepped up, taken their place. They could have been the villain for the day. That's absolutely true. But, I mean, this was one of those things, this was one of those situations here with the $15 minimum wage where Joe Biden, as a part of Bernie Sanders originally dropping out of the 2020 primary and endorsing him, he promised, I'm going to go and fight for a $15 minimum wage. That was one of the only things that Bernie said that he should definitely go and fight for, right? Even though he didn't get any concrete promises on it. And so they make this sort of like half-assed attempt to put it in one of these bills. The Senate parliamentarian, who nobody gives a fuck about, who Republicans have ignored in previous situations where the parliamentarian has objected to their policy goals, and Democrats just completely folded. The parliamentarian says, no, you can't have this in this bill, right? It's not part of the reconciliation process, right? It's not allowed. And so they just listened to it, and they allowed people like Kyrsten Sinema to vote this down, to try to, actually force this into the bill. So that's another part of her legacy there. We also had this, which again is a very helpful graphic in terms of letting you know what was in some of the original Biden proposals, which were actually overwhelmingly good for the most part, and then what actually ended up getting passed, again, thanks to Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. Now, again, obviously, Republicans were overwhelmingly against all of these measures, right, for the most part. But, I mean, it really was because Democrats controlled the Senate. It was a 50-50 split, but they had the tie-breaking vote. They controlled the House of Representatives. They had the presidency. So it really is on you to whip the members of your own party into shape, right? To force them to go in line with your agenda, to go out and campaign against them, if that's what you have to do, to put as much public pressure on them as you possibly can. Joe Biden didn't do any of that. So he effectively allowed them to do this to his agenda, right? Here was the initial proposed, sort of broad scopes Biden agenda at the beginning. I mean, you have all of this money that's supposed to go to climate and education and healthcare and families and manufacturing and buildings and transportation and utilities. And then this is what it ended up being. thanks to, again, people like Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, who torched this, who ripped it into shreds. I mean, education here. I mean, look at this. It goes from this to nothing. I mean, healthcare, again, essentially almost nothing. So a little bit more, ACA subsidies that ended up getting passed. You have some regulations there on pharmaceutical prices that ended up getting passed. Even though it's significantly limited, it takes years to go into place, and it's only for certain prescription drugs. So many different issues with that. They did manage to get a significant veterans benefits, like the PACT Act, for example, which was really only thanks to outside pressure, again, from guys like Jon Stewart, for example. Who went to Congress and demanded that they pass that and brought an immense amount of public pressure on, the U.S. government to end up following through on that. But I mean, also things like climate change, right? And manufacturing and, buildings and utilities. I mean, you can see it in the maps that they provide here from the New York Times, right? Exactly the kind of damage that just a handful of senators can do to a massive, bold agenda that had many different policies in it that were, obviously in the broad picture of things, like sort of like, this is what the default should be. This should be the bare minimum in the wealthiest country that's ever existed on the face of the planet. But, they would have been significant improvements for millions and millions of people. And they got torched into oblivion. Now, another thing I want to mention before I move on to recent update here on Joe Manchin is now that she's out of this race, right, now that she's announced she's not going to run for re-election as an independent, because remember, she left the Democratic Party, right? Because, the Democratic Party's become too radical under Joe Biden's leadership. I mean, it's just a fucking joke. But now we're going to have, it looks like, a head-to-head matchup here with Kari Lake, who is absolutely goddamn insane. Full-blown, I wouldn't even say QAnon adjacent. I mean, like, almost fully there. Somebody who is still to this day insisting, I believe, that she didn't even lose the last election that she ran in. And, obviously still supporting the notion that Donald Trump won the 2020 election as well. And she's running head-to-head against Ruben Gallego. Now, from what I've read, which granted is pretty limited on Gallego, he seems pretty decent. So I do obviously hope that he wins over Kari Lake. And we haven't seen any polling, because this is all the way back from February 21st to 26th. We haven't seen any polling in the aftermath now, obviously it just happened, of Kyrsten Sinema resigning. So it'll be interesting to see how her not being in this race as an independent, right, having a sort of a three-way race there, how that would potentially impact some of these polls. Although I don't know if these polls even included her in the first place, right? Or I guess they did. Okay, so you got to scroll down here. But, so yeah, I mean, in this poll, Kyrsten Sinema, 21%. Kari Lake, 37%. Gallego, 33%. So, I don't know. I mean, you guys tell me. 21% for somebody who formerly was caucusing with the Democrats. Do those votes overwhelmingly go to Gallego? Is it roughly an even split? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out from here. So now, with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to, again, her partner in crime, or really partner in corruption here, Joe Manchin, who was recently confronted by a climate protester for specifically over the Mountain Valley Pipeline. But we'll return to that here in a second. Let's go ahead and watch how this confrontation went down.
Joe Manchin, you have sold our futures and you've gotten rich doing it. You sick. How dare you?
Well, you can see one protester getting thrown to the ground after confronting Manchin. According to the Harvard Crimson, the near brawl happened when 6 demonstrators from the group Climate Defiance interrupted a talk Manchin was giving at a Harvard's Kennedy School on Friday. They were criticizing Manchin's support of the Mountain Valley Pipeline.
Okay. So, obviously, a couple of different things there, right? First off, shout out to whoever this specific protester here was from this climate defiance group, straight up calling Joe Manchin a sick fuck to his face and calling out his corruption in regards to the fossil fuel industry. You absolutely love to see it. This should be Joe Manchin's daily experience, if you ask me. And then you have this guy, who I guess steps between Joe Manchin and the protester. Joe Manchin stood up as if he was about to, fight this guy. Okay, which in and of itself is kind of funny. I honestly would have loved to have seen them, actually end up fighting. But, this guy steps in. I don't know if this is a security guy for Manchin or if this is just some random guy who was in the room. But he just, full-blown assaults this guy who wasn't doing anything to Joe. He was just yelling at him, right? He was just protesting him. And this guy just, throws him onto the ground. And Joe Manchin just sort of, stands by and watches. I don't really know how this isn't just straight-up assault of somebody, because it would be one thing if this guy, the protester was about to attack Manchin. He wasn't. He clearly wasn't. But this guy just throws him onto the ground, right? After Manchin looked like he himself wanted to fight the guy. So you had this protest that took place. And the specifics behind why these people are protesting this, well, I mean, here you go from the New York Times. Manchin's donors include pipeline giants that win in his climate deal. The controversial Mountain Valley Pipeline is one of several projects that the senator has negotiated major concessions for, benefiting his financial supporters. So, I mean, here again, you have the rampant and open and brazen corruption of the U.S. political system, where some of his major donors are going to financially benefit from this pipeline deal that he managed to force into one of these climate bills, right? As a part of, I think it was the Inflation Reduction Act, right? Or maybe it was a bipartisan infrastructure bill. I'm getting them confused on which specific policies were in them. But regardless, he gets this inserted into legislation. And, you know, the Biden administration obviously is aiding and abetting in the process of building more oil pipelines or, you know, fossil fuel pipelines, as if that's what we need right now as we're staring down the barrel of catastrophic results from climate change. And, you know, his donors are going to profit from that. And they're going to be able to continue to help to keep him in power, right? So, I mean, this is how U.S. politics basically functions. And, of course, we have not only him accepting donations from fossil fuel companies and then doing their bidding, but also him personally profiting from the fossil fuel industry. Now, I'll link this down below. I'm not going to go and recap it. I did a report on this a while ago when this article first came out. Jesus, it was 2 years ago at this point. But shout out to Daniel Boguslaw of The Intercept, who basically did a full breakdown on the entire history of Joe Manchin's political careers. I mean, this goes all the way back to like the 80s when he was a state senator in West Virginia and was ripping off his own constituents for his own personal profit and gain in West Virginia with some of his companies at the time, right? With dirty coal and these different various energy companies that he has connections to or directly owned. He tossed some of them off to his son and then put his holdings, I guess, in like a blind trust, even though his son still runs the companies, and pretends as if that's like some sort of a separation from them and that there's no longer a corrupting influence from that. But I mean, there you go. You know, Joe Manchin being confronted by climate protesters because of his rampant corruption in regards to the fossil fuel industry. Kyrsten Sinema announcing that she is not going to be running for re-election, that she's going to be stepping down from the Senate. You'd love to see it. Although, you know, think about the incalculable damage that these two people have done to people's lives just in the last couple of years, regardless of their previous careers before that. I mean, think about the damage that they managed to do just by ripping apart certain portions of Joe Biden's agenda, right? On climate change, on prescription drugs, on Medicare, on Medicaid, on many other issues as well, like childcare, for example, the child tax credit, and universal pre-K, and all of that stuff that was in some of the original bills that Joe Biden was pushing to pass. Unfortunately, not only were these people tearing it apart because they are rotten and corrupt to their core, but also Joe Biden let them do it. He never went out to West Virginia and tried to rally the people against Joe Manchin, blocking bills that were overwhelmingly supported by Joe Manchin's own constituents. He never even directly, publicly criticized these people or used the bully pulpit in any way, shape, or form. And that really is, I think, symbolic of Joe Biden's entire administration and how he wants to do politics. He would much rather allow members of his own party or Republicans across the aisle to completely eviscerate his agenda or drag him all the way, to the right on whatever given policy that we're talking about, than to actually go to bat and to go to war for an agenda that he believes in, right? And so you question, what does he actually believe in, right? And so I think it is really hilarious, honestly, that people were comparing Joe Biden to FDR, because Joe Biden's approach to politics through his administration so far has been the complete opposite of FDR's approach to politics, right? People have been trying to make that argument for a while now. I don't think it's a good argument on the substance of it, because Biden's agenda doesn't come anywhere close to the massive, bold, sprawling agenda of somebody like FDR, but also his approach to politics, his strategy for politics is essentially the complete opposite of what FDR was going for. So, there you have it. Good to see Joe Manchin being confronted, and good to know that we won't have to deal with Kyrsten Sinema for that much longer.